Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Lockery. I'm the Programme Manager for the CO₂ Performance Ladder in the Irish Green Building Council. I'm very excited for this launch event today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. And thank you so much for joining. I hope you learn a lot about this really important tool. So the webinar's focus today is about harnessing the power of green procurement through the use of the CO₂ Performance Ladder. Ireland's climate targets aim to reduce carbon emissions by 51% by 2030 and to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. Through its scale and spending, green procurement in the construction sector has the potential to positively aid Ireland in reaching these vital targets. The CO₂ Performance Ladder is a tool that can help organizations embed green procurement into their organization in an accessible and structured way. The Irish Green Building Council is running a 2-year pilot in collaboration with the Foundation for Climate-Friendly Procurement of Business, otherwise known as SKAO, to bring this outstanding tool to Ireland. So SKAO is the owner and manager of the CO₂ Performance Ladder. In this webinar, the CO₂ Performance Ladder tool will be explained and showcased through case studies from Ireland and the Netherlands. And then this will be followed by a 15-minute Q&A with the expert speakers. I will introduce the speakers now. So we have George Thurley, who is an international account manager for the CO₂ Performance Ladder, coordinating the implementation of the ladder in Ireland and the United Kingdom, and working to boost low carbon procurement through its use across Europe. Before working for the Foundation for Climate-Friendly Procurement and Business, he worked on the circular economy and sustainable food policy at EU level and completed a master's degree in global sustainability. After George, PJ Horgan will be speaking. He is an asset manager engineer within the Network Management Department of Transport Infrastructure Ireland, where he has responsibilities in pavement conditioning and asset management for the National Road Network, active travel infrastructure and greenways. He's a chartered engineer with experience in the design and construction of a wide range of civil engineering infrastructure across Ireland, the UK, and Australia. He has considerable experience in the design and procurement of pavement projects, which this pilot relates to. And finally, we'll have Paul van Hoorn, who is an associate director with ARB in the Netherlands. He's held various positions in the engineering department of the City of Amsterdam between 2000 to 2010. He joined ARB in 2010 in the infrastructure team, started internally with the CO₂ Performance Ladder in 2014 and achieved a certificate level of 5. He's been involved in the internal procedures around the CO₂ Performance Ladder since the launch of the CO₂ Performance Ladder in the Netherlands. And in 2021, the full package was handed over to the internal QHSE team in Amsterdam. So he has first-hand experience in all aspects of CO₂ Performance Ladder, which we'll be hearing about today. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to George now. And also just before any presentation begins, please, if you have any questions, type them in the chat box and they can be asked at the Q&A session at the end of the presentations. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. I'll share my screen. Make sure I'm sharing sound as well. Okay. Hope you can all see that now. Right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar. My name is George Thurley, as Rachel said, and I work for the Foundation for Climate-Friendly Procurement and Business, or SKAO in the Dutch acronym. And SKAO is the independent owner and manager of the CO₂ Performance Ladder, which we're going to be talking about this afternoon. So in my presentation, I'll say a little bit about us as an organization. I'll talk about the two sides of the CO₂ Performance Ladder. It's a tool with two kind of aspects to it, one of which is the CO₂ management system, and the second of which is the use in green public procurement. I'll also share a small video of some experiences from procurers of using the ladder in the Netherlands and Belgium. And then lastly, I'll say a couple of words about implementation in Ireland and how you and your organization could potentially get involved. To start off, This is the theory of change that we use at SKAO, and is really based on what we call using the power of procurement to harness production throughout the value chain, and to provide a business case for companies to invest in carbon reduction. So procuring parties, procuring authorities, by using the CO₂ Performance Ladder in their tender, by which they grant an award advantage to companies. They can stimulate those companies to work structurally on reducing their CO₂ emissions within their organization, their projects, and also their supply chain. And this has knock-on effects of reducing the emissions from a heavy industry, and also behavioral change within the organization itself. And so really the core of this theory of change is offering a carrot to businesses, a positive stimulation through a financial advantage in tenders to invest in carbon reduction. That's the kind of basis principle on which the ladder works. I'll go into more into that in detail shortly. But first, just a word about the foundation as an organization. As Rachel said, we're the owner, administrator, the manager of the CO₂ Performance Ladder. And we always like to emphasize that we're an independent, not-for-profit and politically neutral organization, so we're not commercially driven. We're about creating the most impact and reducing the most carbon emissions, not about growing for the sake of growing. We're a market instrument. The way we like to work is very much by bringing together all the related stakeholders who have something to do with the ladder. So in our expert committee and our board, we have representatives from procuring authorities, from companies, and from third sector experts, NGOs, universities, and so on. A kind of core task is to develop and implement both the certification scheme and the procurement instrument. And we do a lot of activities around that to build capacity, collaborate, connect, conducting research and sharing knowledge amongst our network in order to boost the impacts that we can make in terms of reducing carbon emissions in our network. A little bit of a history lesson about the ladder. The ladder was created in 2009 by ProRail, which is the administrator of the Dutch railways infrastructure. And they created it as a way to have an influence over their Scope 3 emissions, to start tackling the emissions that they had in the supply chain and the projects they were commissioning. So they created the tool in the first place, and after 2 years, in 2011, SKAO was created specifically to manage the tool. And yeah, ever since then, it's been very successful to the point where this year, I actually checked earlier today, we had issued over 1,400 certificates on the ladder. And because multiple organizations can be certified, can be covered by one certificate, we estimate that's about 5,000 organizations, of which 75% are small and medium enterprises. In terms of the international progression of the ladder, in 2019, a pilot with the CO₂ Performance Ladder started in Belgium, which is just finishing this year and gone very successfully. And in 2021, we started a project to look into using the ladder in other places in Europe, which led to the point where we are now, where we have the first pilot outside of Belgium and the Netherlands launched in Ireland. I'll say some more about our international work towards the end of the presentation. But yeah, we're expanding and we're growing year on year, so that's really exciting. And then just to emphasize, it's not only that the ladder's been around for a long time, but it's also that we have the ladder has been proven to be an impactful instrument and have an impact in the way we're looking for it to do so. So the performance ladder is recognized as a best practice in green public procurement by a number of international organizations, including the OECD, the IPCC, and the World Economic Forum. We regularly commission research organizations to evaluate the effectiveness of the ladder, including earlier this year asking CE Delft, which is a Dutch research institute, to look into the impacts of ladder among businesses, and they found that using the CO₂ Performance Ladder leads to accelerated decarbonisation and innovation, and that can be twice as fast with certified organisations as those without a certificate. And they also found that using the CO₂ Performance Ladder within organisations leads to carbon reduction and awareness of those kind of issues being institutionalised within organisations. So what is the CO₂ Performance Ladder? I'm going to explain that now. And as I kind of said, there are two sides to this tool, kind of two sides of the same coin. On the one side is the CO₂ management system, and that's a kind of list of a kind of normative list of requirements, like an ISO norm, by which organizations can get certified if they meet all those requirements at a certain level. On the other side of things is the use of the ladder in green public procurement. And that's essentially a way to give those organizations that have invested in carbon reduction an advantage within those procurement processes, and to stimulate organizations that maybe aren't yet active with carbon reduction to get on and start doing some work on that. I'll start with the management system side of things, and it's maybe helpful to just think about what a certified organization has, what they have to do in order to gain that certificate. So starting in the middle of the slide, the core of the system it's really a CO₂ management system, like a ISO 14001. And the core aspect is what we call the plan, do, check, act cycle. So organizations are always making plans about how they're going to meet the requirements. They're implementing those plans. They're reviewing, do these actually work? Are these having the effects, the impacts that we intended them to? And if not, or if it could be better, then they adjust those, and then the cycle continues. And we refer to that also as a cycle of continuous improvement. So organizations are required to be continuously reviewing what they're doing and making improvements where they can. The way that organizations are checked to see whether they're meeting the requirements, there's an annual audit conducted for every certified organization by an accredited third-party organization. So SKAO doesn't conduct those audits. We just set the requirements which the organizations have to meet, and then a third-party organization is contracted by the organization to conduct that audit. I'll say a bit more about the audits shortly. And I've already kind of referred to this a couple of times, but we're really an organization. Kind of a philosophy in making the ladder was not to reinvent the wheel. So we make sure to align and overlap with existing international standards like ISO standards, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and so on, wherever we can, to ensure that businesses aren't having to do the same thing, but in a different format or kind of a CO₂ Performance Ladder template. That's really our aim, to make it as accessible and consistent as possible with other standards and approaches. So around the kind of core cycle of continuous improvement, there are 4 aspects which the ladder focuses on or has requirements related to. So the first one is insight. So organizations have to get an insight into their carbon emissions, where they're coming from, the kind of greatest, most relevant streams of those. And that includes conducting a verified carbon footprint analysis. Once organizations know what their emissions are, then they have to set reduction targets, ambitious reduction targets to reduce those emissions, and also action plans of how they're going to reach those targets in between now and that time. Thirdly, once they know what their emissions are, once they've set targets to reduce those, they have to communicate about what they're doing, both internally and externally. And last but not least is the area we call innovation and collaboration. So this is really about organizations being able to achieve more together by working with others in their sector or in their supply chain than they can on their own. So we really try and stimulate that using the CO₂ Performance Ladder. Alongside these kind of 4 angles, there are also 5 levels, which is why we refer to it as a ladder. 1 is the lowest and 5 is the highest. And at levels 1 to 3, organizations are focusing on their scope 1 and 2 emissions. So their own organization the emissions they're directly producing, and any energy, electricity they're buying in. And crucially, we include projects that those organizations are conducting at those levels as well. And then from level 4 and 5, companies also start to consider their scope 3 emissions, so their supply chain and industry emissions, both up and downstream. So depending on which level organization is at, they will have to do more or less actions or ambitious requirements will be required. And just a word about the audit side of things. As I said, organizations are audited annually by third-party independent experts. There's a list of the organizations which are able to carry out CO₂ Performance Ladder audits on our website. And the way they do that is by looking at the handbook, which is the kind of normative document by which organizations are assessed to see whether the requirements are being met. And that covers the CO₂ management system, the cycle I talked about, the requirements per level, and the requirements at the project level, as well as some kind of general requirements about how the ladder should be integrated. These are the two kind of key documents on the management system side of things. The handbook, as I mentioned, and then the practical manual is a much more accessible version of those requirements, and you can find both of those on our website. But we'll share these slides afterwards, so you can also find them through here. And then on the green public procurement side of things, this is really the carrot. This is really the reason why a lot of organizations choose to go through all that and to implement all those requirements to get that certificate, is because there's a possibility for them to get an award advantage in tender processes. So, for instance, that could be as a fictitious reduction on their price, giving them a larger chance of winning the tender. But it could also be through a point system, that a certain amount of points would be available based on your level on the ladder. Once again, just to say that the ladder has quite a strong history here. It's been used in over 2,000 tenders in the Netherlands and in Belgium right now, and over 300 public procuring authorities in the Netherlands and Belgium have experience of implementing the ladder over a longer period of time. So it's not, it's certainly a very proven and tested instrument. This is basically just to indicate the advantage, the reason why organizations might get certified in the kind of process. So if a tender process was working using an award advantage, a fictitious discount, then it might be that an organization whose entry price actually wins whose entry price is higher, actually wins the tender because their CO₂ ambition level is higher. So in this case, company C submits the more expensive bid, but because they are certified at level 4, then their price in the end evaluation is the lowest and they win the contract. Just to kind of repeat how it would go in the whole process. From the procuring party, the procuring authority side of things, they would insert the ladder in their most economically advantageous tender criteria. Companies that would then submit with their bids, they would submit their ambition level. And we always recommend and we always advise procuring authorities to use the ladder as an optional advantage, award advantage criteria. So if a company chooses to submit ambition level 0, then that's also allowed. Another crucial point is that the ambition level that the company submits, they don't have to have at the time of submission. So it could be that an organization which isn't yet certified could say, we think we'll be able to execute this project at level 3, or it could be that an organization already certified at level 3 thinks that they could actually execute it at a higher level. They then have, if they would win the contract, they would then have a year, we advise, in a year time in which to achieve that level. It varies depending on the procurement process, and I think PJ can say a bit more about how that's been implemented in Ireland shortly and by TIA. So at the time of submission, at the time of submitting the bids, it's an optional award advantage criteria. So organizations don't have to do it. If they do win the contract, then it becomes part of their contract requirements. It becomes written into the contract that they have to perform the project at the level at which they submit it. So yeah, in this case, the procuring party would award the contract based on the best value for money. They would insert the CO₂ ambition level into the contract, and organizations would be able to prove this in one of two ways, either with a certificate at the organization level or with proof at the project level. And then they would execute the project following the requirements laid out by the CO₂ Performance Ladder. These are also two very useful documents on the procurement side of things, which are also available on our website. So now I'm going to show a video of a couple of procurers from the Netherlands, Harold Versteeg from the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, and Dirk van Trooijen from the Flemish Road and Traffic Agency. Just about 3-4 minutes of them sharing their experiences of implementing the ladder as procurers. But you can see the whole webinar also online.
We want to be climate neutral in 2030. So that means that the building, the maintaining of the infrastructure, not the use of the infrastructure by the cars and the ships, but the part that we do and the part that our contractors do should be climate neutral. So many things have to change. And that's why we believe in a system like the Carbon Performance Ladder that makes our suppliers think about how are we going to help the ministry to reach their goals. Because that is why we do green sustainable procurement. We want to make them think about what is important for us. So as Maud already showed the carrot and the stick, we believe in both the carrot and the stick have a function. Whereas in the European guidelines of the minimum quality requirements, that's what we consider the sticks, things you have to do. That is nice, that makes it impossible for the really bad people to sell us their really bad products. But we want to have the carrot there, that if you are really clever and you do more, so if you are an innovative company, you have optimized process, you have invested in clean materials, in clean processes, then we want to be able to give you more work than if you are an old-fashioned company that is not taking carbon into account. That we don't ask for the certificates, we never make it obligated to use it, but it's their choice to use an instrument. That there are some things in the certificate that we are not allowed to ask as a buyer. But if, on the other hand, a company chooses voluntarily to use a certificate, then they accept that these extra things are in there. And we think that's a good thing because it's all the things that we like them to do. So we think it's very cost effective, it is low risk, and the discussion whether it's legal or not, it just isn't there anymore.
So in 19, then the governments of the Flemish, Walloon and Brussels regions, not the federal government, if you know Belgium a little bit, you know that we have a lot of governments. So they decided that we would have a pilot phase, initially 3 years, but it was extended to 4 years. And some positive points are that the procurer, he can always change the conditions of in the tender to his liking in other countries perhaps. So you could use different award criteria, you could use points instead of fictional reduction. You could adjust the fines, and we saw that it's not much work for the project leader, it's true. You could just copy paste some clauses, adapt some things perhaps. It didn't need a bit of training. We need more webinars in the future. So you'll see more of these probably. And it's also a big advantage that the burden of proof is on the contractor and that not the procurer needs to go after the contractor all the time, and it's always a lot of work asking for documents, and you can't move on without the documents. No, the burden of proof is on the contractor, so that's a lot less work for us and annoyance. And no extra cost for us. We saw this in the prices, they were all reasonable and normal. And in the end, we can conclude that it's a clear impulse for companies to use more sustainability measures. We can clearly see that they're thinking more about these actual things that they can do on the wharf or in the plants. So that's a very, very positive thing in the end.
I want to mention that.
All right, try and move on to the next slide. There we are. So that was some experiences from the procuring authorities side of things, which I think is always helpful to hear. Just to conclude, to wrap up on the system side of things, we see there are many advantages both for procuring authorities. So it's a proven methodology which has already been tested in the Netherlands and Belgium. It's pretty low transaction costs for procuring authorities to implement. The fact that the certification is assessed by a third-party auditor, a certifying body, that lowers the burden on procurement authorities to verify the claims of their suppliers, and it's compliant with EU procurement law, making it easy to implement within the EU immediately. But also for businesses, it creates a green business case to invest in carbon reduction. The tool is proven to be effective at doing that. It can help businesses to reinforce their market position as sustainable suppliers and to improve their products, their services, their processes. And it's a multi-use tool. So if an organization is certified, they can use that one certificate for all the projects, for all the contracting authorities using the ladder. So yeah, we already see there's benefits for both procuring authorities and for companies of using the system. Just briefly at the end, before my time is up, I'll say a little bit about our international work. So as I said, since 2021, SKAO has been active to look at using the ladder in other European countries, and we're collaborating that with a number of international organizations. So the think tank International Institute for Sustainable Development, IGBC, which is a network of local sustainable governments, local authorities, and Utrecht University. And really our goal is to implement the ladder in a number of pilots, like the one that's been set up in Ireland. So France is also about to start shortly. As Rachel mentioned in my intro, I'm also working on setting up a pilot in the UK, and colleagues of mine are looking at possibilities in Germany. So the more the use of the ladder grows, the more businesses will benefit from the certificate they have. And then a word on Ireland. We're collaborating with the Irish Green Building Council, as Rachel said, and they're kind of our people on the ground, our first point of contact, so that because obviously IGBC has the contacts in Ireland and the network, so they're responsible for implementing in Ireland and conducting webinars like this, communication and capacity building. And us as SKAO, together with the other project partners, are providing support to the Irish and the local national organizations. And as PJ will say a bit about shortly, there's already been the first procurement process with Transport Infrastructure Ireland in Ireland, and we hope other procuring authorities will follow soon. Thank you very much. That's my presentation. I'll hang around for the question and answers at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, George. It was a great presentation. And thank you everyone for writing your questions in the chat. So I'll pass it over to PJ now. Thanks. You're on mute there, PJ.
Sorry. Hello, afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. My name is PJ Harrigan. I'm an asset management engineer with Transport Infrastructure Ireland. I suppose Transport Infrastructure Ireland is the state agency which is responsible For the National Road Network, we do have other responsibilities, but I suppose for this presentation relates to some of the work on the National Road Network. Our motivation to use the CO₂ Performance Ladder is, I suppose, two-pronged. First of all, we've a procurement motivation in that the Climate Action Road Plan sets the carbon reduction for the state to be 51% carbon reduction by 2030, after which TI have created a suite of documents. One of them is the TI Climate Action Roadmap, which identifies sustainable procurement as a key measure of reducing emissions through supply chains. This is where the TI Procurement Department, led by Paul Farley, came in and identified the CO₂ ladder as an appropriate method to progress with sustainable procurement. And as you can see in the document over on the right-hand side, we've actually identified the CO₂ Performance Ladder as our case study in sustainable procurement. TI is keen to have a green procurement that is not just a tick box issue, but also drives real change. And I hope you've seen that from George's presentation, that companies which participate in the CO₂ Performance Ladder drives real decarbonisation within the industry. From a project level within network management, we deal with the asset renewal of our pavements throughout the country. And this is a slide from our recent TI conference where there was a presentation on decarbonisation by one of my colleagues. You can see from the graph that that is our carbon emissions profile for pavement projects over the next 20 years. This striking element is the red line, which dissects the graph, and that is our carbon targets, with the red dot being 2030, 51% reduction, and then tapering off to net zero by 2040 or 2050. So within network management, we have a massive challenge on our hands to decarbonize the pavement renewal projects that we progress and that we sponsor. And that is why we're interested in the carbon ladder, because the carbon ladder shows that industry buy-in creates decarbonisation within participating organisations, and that will help us get closer to the red line. I suppose a little talk about the pilot scheme. For the pilot scheme, we're using the M7 Kildare Bypass Pavement Renewal Scheme, which is 11.5 kilometres of motorway in one direction, estimated contract value of 4 million, with duration of 3 months, so it's a relatively short scheme. For this project, we are both the sanctioning authority and contracting authority, and our designer and contract document production and employers representative is done by Atkins Realis. For the procurement method for the scheme, we're using the Capital Works Management Framework, which is the PwC F5 suite contracts, which is the minor civil engineering contracts designed by the employer. A key element of the procurement process for this pilot was our pre-tender consultation with our existing pavement framework. We've an existing pavement framework for these type schemes, and prior to advertising the contract, we had a pre-tender consultation with ourselves, Network Management, TI, Procurement, and SKAO, and it was essential to get early buy-in for the scheme, but also to address any queries that the contracting authorities had. Excuse me. The main queries that came up from the tenders were that one of the main issues that came up in the pre-tender consultation was that certification is currently done by the Netherlands and Belgium authorities. A lot of the tenders that we have started on their decarbonisation journey. So one of their main concern was that they're not reinventing the wheel, which George mentioned earlier. And they were satisfied that the work that they have already commenced on their decarbonisation journey could be credited towards their carbon ladder. I suppose from a contracting authority point of view, how does the carbon ladder fit in with our existing tender documents? And then from a tender's point of view, what additional requirements are needed for carbon ladder? So as you can see, there's a lot there, but in generally speaking, there was not a massive amount of work to include it within our tender documents, and likewise not a massive amount of work for the tenders. Our main revision was the inclusion of Appendix 6 within our contract documents, which details the carbon ladder process, which explains the award advantage for each implementation level, the options for achieving implementation levels, and also non-performance charges for the non-achievement of desired implementation level. I suppose from a contractor's point of view, the main issue would be to aim their implementation level to what is achievable. As this is a pilot, as I was saying, there's no contracting authorities currently in Ireland, so I have to work with contracting authorities currently in Netherlands or Belgium. We're currently in the middle of the award process for that contract. We had the tender competition. We had 5 tenders in. The important part was that all 5 tenders submitted a desired implementation level with their tender, which shows good buy-in to the process. And so our main objective is to complete the current trial. Then on foot of successfully completing the trial, and with the information that we have at the moment, we're comfortable to expand the CO₂ Performance Ladder to other pavement contracts within the high-speed pavement renewal framework. After that, we can encourage the use of the CO₂ Performance Ladder on similar pavement renewal contracts for TIs to sanction authority. If you remember back to the graph on one of the slides, there's approximately 110 million euros worth of pavement works per year done on the TI network, so that is a significant amount of work. Longer term ambitions for the TI would be to evaluate award advantage discounts to drive decarbonisation within the industry. So if implementation levels plateau at a certain level, we could increase the award advantage discount to encourage higher implementation levels being achieved within contracts. And also we could evaluate the use of minimum implementation levels as pre-qualification for criteria for contracts. I suppose the carbon ladder participation is optional within contracts, but if we really want to drive change within the industry and get contractors and tenders who are really driving decarbonisation in their industry, this is something we might have to look at further down the line. So in summary, what we found is we've had positive buy-in from framework participants. Like I said, we had 5 tenders for this contract, with the 5 tenders also submitting a desired implementation level. What we have noticed is that there's tenders preference for CO₂ awareness certificates, which is company-wide certification. This creates an opportunity to simplify contracts. This could be mainly because the industry as well, it's a relatively short contract, it's a 3-month contract. So if pavement contractors are coming to the tender with their CO₂ awareness certificate for their company, we can evaluate their certificate at that stage, and then it simplifies the contract in that we wouldn't have to worry about penalisation clauses down the line if the desired implementation level is not achieved. My key learning from this process has been the opportunity to acknowledge the existing work that has been done within the industry, which I don't think we probably have been acknowledging to a great extent. And the carrot and stick approach, it rewards tenders who are working towards decarbonisation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, PJ, for that wonderful presentation. And I'm going to pass it on to Paul now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I'll just see if I can share my screen. Stop. Yes. Let me just see. Where am I? This one. I'm just sorry. I have to check where my screen is now. Share screen. I don't see my screen. Show all screens. Yeah. This one. Yeah. Okay, if I'm correct, you're seeing my screens, IGBC and the CO₂ Performance Ladder. Yep, thank you very much. There will be 19 slides. I'll just briefly go through them. This is actually my personal journey through the CO₂ Performance Ladder, the CO₂ Performance Ladder, starting in 2014 and ending in 2023 today. It's a view from Arab BV, and that's important to notice, Arab BV, so it's the local Arab subsidiary. My name is Paul van Hoorn. I'm an associate director there. Now, one of the things, our firm, I'll talk about it, but one of the things that is important to see that, let's say, we pride ourselves in being dedicated to sustainable development. And I'll leave this all other to read, but it's an international firm dedicated to sustainable development, and that has some relation to our reason to start with the CO₂ Performance Ladder. We have a head office in London, also relevant in this case, also for, let's say, the CO₂ Performance Ladder, and I'll come back on that later. A large Amsterdam in the middle of your picture is one of the, let's say, many offices that we have. And the Netherlands is one of the countries that we work in. So that is also some of the things that was instrumental in this case, in our case. Okay, we are, let's say, an employee-owned company. That means we are, let's say, we pursue the vision of the firm without any pressure from stakeholders. Also important in this case. Our aims, actually the things that we want to achieve, quality of work, total architecture, humane organization, were all laid out, and straight honorable deals, were all laid out in the key speech by Sir Ove Arab at an early convention with his associates in the early 70s, and that has been, let's say, instrumental in guiding the firm. Now, why did we actually start with this CO₂ Performance Ladder? And I'll go through it, but actually one of the things is, let's say, charity begins at home. Actually, the other thing is walk the talk. We say we are dedicated to sustainable development. We have to show it to, let's say, make an impact on our own work. That's one part. The second part is also that at that time, in 2014, the CO₂ Performance Ladder was in its early days. There were, from ProRail actually, whom we targeted as a client, there were 10% discounts offered in the tenders, which is, for example, for a professional engineering firm, is a substantial amount of discount. It's a game changer. Now, that was also something that was important. So there's a commercial side to it. There is a kind of, how we should call it, walking the talk side to it. Rijkswaterstaat, the Dutch Highways Agency, and Waterways Agency, I think part equivalent of TII, was a bit slower to take on this CO₂ Performance Ladder. Not applying it very systematically as well. I distinctly remember a discussion once with one of the project managers from Rijkswaterstaat when I asked him, isn't it time for you to start thinking about carbon reduction? When he said to me, well, we are the client, we don't have to do that. So it was in the early days also kind of, it felt like an uphill battle. Now, just for those, and I think George must have mentioned it, for us actually as a services firm, we have some part in scope 1, some part in scope 3, but we don't own anything actually. So it's our main emissions come from the company cars, come from the travel that we do, but because we don't have a large material flow. But one of the important things for that we found out early enough is actually to decide on the reporting company. We are a local subsidiary of an international firm, and we can only influence the local conditions, so the Netherlands, not the London office. So we had to really confine ourselves to only the operations in the Netherlands, which is good to mention, because we started very small. We were an island actually in that sense within Arab, and we were the only ones at that time in 2014 and about until 2020 reporting on carbon. Now the results over the years, this is the main graph that I have on for you. There's several things at play here. You could see, first of all, you could see that our operations, the international operations, and the carbon emissions are very much influenced by the type of projects that we win. Now, the peak in 2017, 2018 was a large project in the Netherlands where we had to involve a lot of offices. And I was involved in this project as well. At the peak of the project, we had 14 offices worldwide involved, and to be able to be effective, we had to fly in those people. So the peak in 2017-18 was mostly flights, air travel. That's one thing. The second thing is that you can see a distinct, let's say, drop during the COVID crisis. And that has also been, well, kind of instrumental in achieving certain things. I'll come back on it later. But it achieved a longer lasting effect on carbon reduction. And the last thing is, up to that point, actually, 2020, we were, let's say, more or less using it as a kind of rear view mirror, looking back on what we had, because we had a general idea where we were going. We would never have anything until, let's say, a goal until 2030. So that's when I proposed, let's say, let's make an assumption that we will do everything we can to reduce carbon. What is our absolute lowest carbon emission? So that is the graph, that is the result of this. Now, the scope 1, 2, 3, I mentioned earlier, scope 1 is the company direct emissions in terms of company cars and buildings, but I'll come back to that later as well. The second one, scope 2, is the stuff that we buy, and scope 3, there's been a shift there. It was originally air travel, and it then shifted. The grand total has moved through the years, actually, and until 2022, that's the real figures that we have. Now, what are the drivers here, and how did we, what do we focus on? So in the scope 1, one of the things it would be, for us as a service firm, reduce the amount of company cars. In the Netherlands, company cars are a secondary benefit from a certain job. The entitlements were dropped, and everyone, let's say, it was much reduced. And the second thing was any company car, any new company car, or a contract for that would have to be an electrical car, basically virtually eliminating any emissions from that side. The second one is in scope 2, the energy purchase. It is enormously beneficial to purchase green electricity, because then your emission goes to zero as well. And then the business travel. That is for us, a great deal of emissions. Third one, the employee commuting. So basically concentrating, focusing on these 4 issues, you can achieve a lot. Now, it's a bit in the way here, the screen, but you can see, and I think we could have pushed even more. Between 2014 and 2022, we had a 20 FTE increase in staff, but we managed almost, let's say, half the emissions. And that is, and the plus that you see, the plus 29% is also basically is because of a shift that was explained in earlier, the shift from business travel from scope 2 to scope 3. Let me just see, page down. Yeah. The other things that we are looking at now is looking at, okay, if we look at where we are, what are the biggest drivers actually? This is a kind of a relative, what is the relative source of our emissions actually? It is still air travel. We try to make a prediction now until 2030. It is travel, business travel by car, and it's electricity. Now the electricity, as you can see, between 2017 and 2019, there was a reduction in electricity emissions. That was due because our landlord had purchased green electricity. After 2019, or actually between 2019 and 2020, we were sold, our building was sold. And the new landlord didn't have any green electricity, so the electricity emissions went up again. That's also something to remember. One of the other things I was looking for always is to make it kind of produce the relevant metrics and to make it internally easier to relate to people how we were doing. So what I did actually, I started reporting in carbon emissions per FTE in kilos per year and setting targets that people could relate to. As you can see, this actually follows the up and down of the projects, but we're still, let's say, a lot lower than we were in the early days, so the mid 2010s. What do I think in retrospect are the key success factors? The mobility policy that we issued. So the reduced number of company cars, the conversion to electricity, and also employee commuting by rail. Dutch rail is powered by green electricity. So anyone commuting by rail has 0 emissions. That helped us a lot. The energy purchase of green electricity helped us for a while. We're pushing for that as well, again, but it's also a bit of a struggle. The reduced mobility actually showed us one thing, and I think every company in the world already knows it. Reduction in travel during the COVID years, actually, for the first time, let's say the management of Arab found out that remote working is actually a viable option. We had, let's say, the business didn't collapse. In fact, we had some of the years were the best in the history of the company, let's say financially. So it was kind of a practical exercise in, okay, how could we start using remote working? And what we did actually is maximum use of the SKAO resources. There are in the Netherlands a lot of pointers and resources to come up with possible carbon reduction measures that you can take in and around the office. And once again, we are a services firm, so we don't have any direct production. Most of the time, it's about office work. So what other factors did play a role? Actually, it was not all roses. Actually, we had at times it felt like an uphill struggle. The building tenant, as a building tenant, we are not the owner, so we have limited influence on energy purchase. When the new owner came on board, he asked us to convince all the other tenants to, let's say, go to green electricity as well. And I did so, but there were 6 tenants, and the 6th one said, I'll just buy a Norwegian certificate. That's good enough for me. But for SKAO, Norwegian certificates are not enough. And that's a bit of a technical issue, but in Norway, the hydropower electricity and the certificates are sold separately. So you can buy a certificate and green your electricity by using the certificate. Well, that is not good enough. That doesn't increase the amount of green energy available. So that was a bit of a difficulty, having not owning the building, not owning the energy purchase contract. When I said, let's say we are a global company, there are some downsides to it as well. Our global website does not allow the type of reporting that SKAO initially wanted from us. I guess, let's say from the new handbook, I think it's changed, but initially we had lots of troubles getting through past the audits because we didn't have any right to produce the necessary publications on the global website. And the global website has a link to the Netherlands website. So that is a downside of being an international company. And the other thing is, let's say, is that we are an early starter. We started in 2014 in the Netherlands. Now, since then, let's say there's been a global drive also for whole life carbon, and they have their own reporting standards. So now we have to comply with the SKAO standards, but we also have the internal standards that we have to apply to, and we have to fill in 2 types of forms actually for that. It makes it, well, it's an internal, we do it to ourselves. It's an internal thing, but it's also something worth mentioning. Externally, what I find is that for the public clients like ProRail and Rijkswaterstaat, the CO₂ Performance Ladder is more relevant than the private clients. The private clients have other measures, and they are imposed legally. The MPG, so the kind of the performance measures for buildings. So the public clients, the big public infrastructure clients, are actually the main target for us. And one of the things we also mentioned is we won less projects than expected with the carbon benefit. But okay, that is something that we have. This is just something that we see looking back. Now, what are the benefits? What's the benefit cost analysis? It's $1 million question, and I went through it, and as I said, and as Rachel said in the beginning, I've done this from the very start, and I think my estimate is that for a company our size, we are, let's say, about 250. It would take about a full day a month for a person to comply with everything. But the basic thing is you have to start setting up data flows towards this, and that takes a lot of time, especially if you have to convince your facility manager to go to all the lease car companies, to go to the electricity company, all these other things, to have these 7 main parameters. Now, I highlighted the paper purchase because actually we looked at that initially, because in the scope, the purchases are important, and we are, let's say, the only actual material we use are the paper and IT equipment. Now, the paper purchase, after a few years, I said, no, this is useless. This is not going to, it was minimal compared to things like commuting and business travel by plane. So we skipped that. What you have to, for the 1 day a month, what you have to do is not only gather the information, but you also have to prepare the yearly documents in a presentation. You have to have an internal audit, and you have to prepare for the external audit. So it is what I would say a lower bound thing. You can improve it. Let's say it might start at 2 days and it come down once you get the flow of information under control. Now, where do we go from here? Actually, the outlook. So what do things stand? The one thing is we jumped from 0 to level 5, but now for the engineering firm is pretty standard now. It's the new standard. So it's very, let's say, we have to look, okay, where do we go from here? All the easy things are gone. We face more difficult questions now. And for us as service companies, it's relatively easy because, let's say, we don't have much material input. I guess for contractors and for factories, it would be different. What we see happening is that the environmental cost impact, the MKI, that is often used at Rijkswaterstaat tenders, is basically it's a costed LCA, is gaining more traction because it doesn't sit at a fixed level. It can theoretically go to 0 using secondhand material, using emissionless machinery. All these kind of things can have you end up as having an MKI of 0. And this is a very, very large driving force in Dutch tenders at this point. That's also something that I found at SKAO. I applaud the initiative, but it has to cover a lot of different companies. So that is a problem also. For us, it's it's finding a way of dealing with it, and well, what should we say? Yeah, it's finding a way through the maze of stuff that you have to find out. My lessons, well, to be brutally honest, it's I wrote this maybe a dark hour, but it could be an administrative hell to get the data and to keep the data clean and let's say know where it's coming from. If I look at the data that we produced in the early days, I see strange spikes, and I think the spikes that we saw that's just wrong data. We didn't get the right data. Someone gave something to us because we continued pestering them about data, but we weren't giving the correct data. So it's always a bit of a struggle to get it. The tender benefit, well, one of the things, let's say, the tender benefits that gave in the early stages, let's say walking the talk and charity begins at home, gave us the drive actually to get to this stage. So that's a beneficial thing. It's a good thing. It allowed us also to go against the friction that we had internally, against the web editors who wouldn't allow us access to the global website and all these things. Let's say, let's do it something. We say that we care about carbon emissions. Let's do this. We have to do this. We owe it to ourselves. One of the things I already mentioned, there seems to be a big difference between buildings and infra, between public and private clients in the way they use the carbon emissions and the SKAO, mainly because that's the competing standards. There's a typo there, but the energy performance of buildings, the material performance, and the performance ladder, and the MKI. There seems to be kind of a competing standard thing here going on here. And that is about it, actually. Any questions I'll take up later. Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you so much, Paul, for that wonderful presentation. We're going to move on to the Q&A session now. It's going to be max 15 minutes long. So I'll just ask the questions that have been asked in the chat. Thank you everyone for putting the questions in. So the first question is, it's kind of, I suppose, for everyone here, but is it possible for a company to bid on a tender and commit to a CO₂ performance ladder level for the project without the whole of the company complying with the CO₂ performance ladder? George, do you want to answer that first?
Sure. Yeah. Yes, that is possible. The way we recommend to use the ladder in tenders is to refer to a CO₂ ambition level. So yeah, it's not specifically saying you must have a certificate on the performance ladder, and then that there are a number of different ways which you can prove you're meeting that ambition level. And one of them is by having the certificate at the organization level, which is then following the procedure as laid out by us. The other opportunity is to apply those same requirements specifically to that project. So that's, yeah, to give the choice to the tenderers in terms of what they prefer, and to ensure that there's still that connection to the subject matter. It's kind of referring to what Harold said in the video. The procuring authority doesn't ask explicitly for the certificate, but the certificate is a way that they can prove the ambition level. I think in the TII tender, it worked in the same way, also with the possibility to use equivalent proof to the performance ladder. So yeah, it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I think that question might be in relation to something that I said in my presentation, that all of the tenders we received for our contract were going towards the CO₂ ambition level, which is company-wide performance. But as George was saying, there was the option that the tenders were given. They could go for either a company-wide certification or a project-level certification. Personally, I think they've probably gone for a company-wide certification given the short duration of the contract, and also the the companies that are on our framework have, say, maybe 100 similar projects per year on the road network. So I think they see that as an opportunity that if they go for a company-wide certification, that they can use that certification for each tender competition if we were to implement a CO₂ performance ladder, I suppose, more widely within our tendering organization.
That was also one of our reasons to go company-wide. Actually, for the Arab BV, you don't have to, let's say, show it for every project. And as we see now, actually, for example, Rijkswaterstaat is actually demanding it for the framework. So you don't get on the framework, so you have to do it company-wide.
Thank you very much. There's a question here directly for PJ. So who will certify the successful organization's performance statement or verify the CO₂ awareness certificates?
So in the contract documents, we had a specific appendix which outlined the CO₂ performance ladder and what was all about, and the difference of the implementation levels and penalization clauses. But also in that, we did state that the current certification organizations were based in the Netherlands and Belgium. At the moment, there's no companies in Ireland that are certified to provide the certification for the carbon ladder. So that also came up at the pre-tender consultation. So the framework participants were made aware at an early stage that they would have to get the certification from either the Netherlands or Belgium.
Maybe I can add a little bit, because it's kind of a pilot period, and there's only been one tender issued in Ireland with the ladder to this point. Then there isn't the kind of market of certifying bodies that we have in the Netherlands and Belgium. Obviously, in the course of the next 2 years that we're running this pilot together with the Irish Green Building Council, creating more Irish or recruiting more Irish certifying bodies to carry out those audits will be part of that program. Some of the certifying bodies which are already accredited to carry out ladder audits are also active in Ireland. So organizations like SGS, DECRA, those kind of organizations, but we'll also look at adding local Irish certifying bodies. I put the link in the chat to the organizations that are currently able to conduct audits. For example, looking at the way it went in Belgium is, since 2019, there have been 3 Belgian certifying bodies which have been added alongside the Dutch ones. But I think at this very early stage, then the auditors coming from the Netherlands will be the short-term solution. Yeah.
And I can add a bit to that as well. In Ireland, we're looking for auditors for the CO₂ performance ladder, and I'm reaching out to organizations who are currently auditing or doing these kind of audits in different ways. So if any auditors are here, anyone interested, please reach out to me at rachel@igbc.ie. So moving on to the next question. Can you advise if a project or organization are certified under the CO₂ performance ladder at a particular level? Is there a level that is consistent with compliance with do no significant harm and climate proofing under the common provisions regulations? Also, does the CO₂ performance ladder take into account whole life carbon and embodied carbon, in particular where the project is a renovation project or a refurbishment project? Oh, this is of buildings, actually, sorry. Just to make that clear. Does anyone George, do you want to answer that maybe?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as I said, the levels are kind of focused on the scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions, so kind of from a monitoring point of view. So I think if we're talking about whole life cycle embodied carbon, then that would mostly come at levels 4 and 5 when organizations have to start considering the materials they're buying in and using on a project. Yeah, perhaps in terms of philosophy of the ladder, it's more about the processes. So, for instance, if a construction company won a contract to build a bridge or to renovate a road is in Ireland, then what the ladder is really doing is ensuring that the processes that that organization is using, so perhaps the machinery it's using on that site, it's stimulating that to become more sustainable. What the ladder doesn't necessarily do is say that bridge or that building or that road will be made with sustainable materials. So often what we do see in the Netherlands, I think Paul mentioned this, is that there's a combination of the ladder, which looks more at the organizational level and the kind of processes, the way of working of that company and the way of executing the project, is then combined with a tool which is more about the environmental costs of particular materials being used. A kind of sustainable building calculator is also often used in the Netherlands. So you can kind of combine the organization level view with a product level view within tenders. I think that's the most effective way. In terms of the sustainability of materials, we do see that the ladder stimulates things like recycling within roadworks, recycling of asphalt material, low temperature asphalt, all those kind of measures. But it's not that in the ladder handbook it's specifically written that those things have to happen, if that makes sense.
Great. Does anyone else want to add something? No? No. Okay. So are there any examples of public sector projects using the ladder, specifically local authorities?
I suppose the TI pilot, TI is a state agency, so we are a public sector body, and this is a pilot on a public project. I don't know if there are any local authorities that are going to trial the project, but like I said, this is one of our ambitions as TI Network Management. We are the sanctioning authority for paving schemes on the national road network around the country, which is somewhere in the order of 50 to 100 million euros worth of works per year. So that is, after successful trial behind the TI, that is something that we would be looking to help local authorities with in their green procurement journey by using Carbon Ladder for similar projects to the pilot project which I was speaking about today. I'm not sure the regulatory reporting duties, maybe they're talking about carbon reduction KPIs. So an implementation level wouldn't directly relate to someone's or some organizations or local authorities' carbon reduction, but I think the graph that I showed the scale of work that needs to be done to decarbonize the industry. This is one measure on top of other measures that we're doing. So, and as George said, there is academic research from the Netherlands which shows that contractors which use implementation bodies decarbonize twice as fast as bodies that don't. So I think the lesson is that companies buying into the Carbon Ladder means that construction projects will decarbonize quicker.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe just to add, certainly if there are any procuring authorities on the call who would be interested in using the ladder, do get in touch with me or with Rachel. I don't know whether I maybe misunderstood the question, but if the question was about whether local authorities or government agencies themselves get certified, gain a certificate on the ladder, that is something we have increasingly seen in the Netherlands. We don't normally talk about it in an international view because then we focus on the procurement side of things, but I can certainly share more information on that if you'd be interested. I would also say on the monitoring side of things, the fact that by virtue of using the ladder in procurement processes, your suppliers will have better insight into the emissions related to the works they're carrying out for you as a government agency. So that could be a way of improving your monitoring of your Scope 3 emissions.
Thank you. It's going up to 15:15. I'll ask one more question, but there's a number of other questions in the chat. So I can put my email in the chat if anyone wants to ask me this question. I can send it on to the speakers. So the last question here is, the CO₂ Performance Ladder structure is voluntary at the moment. Should this be made mandatory at EU, national and local authority level? The yes, no answer. Final question.
Well, I would say no. I would say no. It's these things. Let's say it could be more targeted to specific industries and their ways of how they can decarbonize. And I think there is EU legislation already in the making that everyone has to start reporting. Every company has to start reporting on their carbon emissions anyway. So let's say adding another layer of let's say things that you have to do. I think no, this is voluntary. It's good enough actually for us as a company. It was okay. We want to show that we mean business in terms of decarbonizing, and there is a let's say a benefit in tenders. That is good enough. Yeah, I'm of the opinion that you can take the water to the well, the horse to the well. You can't force it to drink.
I mean, I would agree to an extent. You know, like I said at the beginning, SKAO isn't about commercial organization growth. We don't need our tool to be required, mandatory for anyone else. But we know it's a system that works from our experience in the Netherlands and Belgium. So we want to support new companies, new organizations to use it if they want to. But I think Paul's right. There's frameworks coming at European level within which the ladder fits and can be a way of meeting the requirements. So I think that's adequate.
Yeah, I'd be the same opinion as the two other speakers, that it shouldn't be mandatory, but we'd hope that it would get to a stage where it is omnipresent within the procurement industry, that it is effectively mandatory, that there is enough organizations out there with a CO2 awareness certificate or project level statement that people have the certification to show their decarbonisation efforts.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Thanks so much to the speakers. Thanks so much for everyone who attended. If you would like to implement the CO₂ Performance Ladder in your organization, please send me an email at rachel@igbc.ie. That's RACHEL@igbc.ie. And I couldn't get through all the questions because there was too many. But if you have any more questions, please send them on to myself, and I can send them on to the speakers. I put my email into the chat there if you want to copy it. And I'm just going to send in some links as well, just in case you're interested in learning more. So thank you so much for attending, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.